Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Multifamily Review, the podcast dedicated to navigating the ever-evolving landscape of the multifamily industry. This week, we dive into a shadowy realm that's costing property owners and managers millions: fraud. It's a silent epidemic, often unseen, but always felt. From falsified pay stubs to sophisticated synthetic identities, resident fraud is on the rise, and impact goes far beyond just financial loss. Think about it. Who are you really letting into your communities? What risks are lurking beneath the surface of seemingly perfect applications? Joining us today is Dan Berlind, CEO of Snappt, a leading expert in fraud detection and prevention. He's going to pull back the curtain on the most common and most terrifying fraud trends plaguing our industry. He'll share shocking insights, real-world examples, and practical advice to protect your properties and your bottom line. Get ready to have your eyes open, because what you're about to hear might just change the way you screen residents forever. Dan, thank you for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
You know what? We're here to talk today about a pretty important topic: fraud, which I think is one of these extremely big trends right now within the industry. And I guess my first question to you, Dan, is this: what are the most common types of resident fraud that you're seeing within the industry today?
Yeah, it's a great question, and something we've been railing about since about January 2019. So the same type of fraud that we're seeing today is the same thing that my co-founder started seeing in 2017, 2018, which is that more and more applicants, when they're applying for vacant units across the country, they're using, fake financial information. So this could be they're using fake bank statements, fake pay stubs, digital versions of documents using photo editing software or PDF editing software. They could be going up online to one of the thousands of fraud rings out there that literally create these documents and pictures from the ground up. They could be doing, a version of identity fraud or synthetic identity, which is about 1%, in comparison to financial fraud, which is about 10%. I think maybe one of the more worrying trends of fraud that we're seeing is what we call inception fraud. So essentially what fraudsters are doing is they're going online and they're creating fake businesses and then committing federal tax fraud and basically gaining access into legitimate payroll companies like ADP and Gusto and whatnot. And then they're selling real documents that are coming out of these platforms but of course are total BS. So that's on the payroll side. And then on the bank account linking side, we're seeing fraud rings that are creating these logins and whatnot, so that applicants can log in into these payroll company, or rather into these bank account linking companies and pull that information. So I think the worrying thread is that we're seeing the sophistication of fraud advancing, across the industry.
That is extremely worrying. You just talked about some things I didn't even know were happening. So now I'm even more terrified of the future. I hate to be this guy, but it wouldn't be a multifamily review podcast if we didn't at least talk a little bit about AI in the world of new and emerging trends that we should be aware of. Are you seeing anything being done with AI in the world of fraud right now?
I think what we're seeing is fraudsters trying to utilize it right now as a way of making some of the edited documents and synthetic identities and whatnot more sophisticated. And I think what it's done is it's unlocked for the average fraudster, not like a career, one of these fraud rings, but I think just for like the average, fraudster to like quickly Google and figure out all of the different tools that make it incredibly easy in comparison to how it was a year ago or like a few years ago to perpetrate fraud.
How's the rise of digital applications and remote interactions? I think a big thing right now in the industry is, hey, let's centralize some of like the leasing things, so you don't have people on site who are checking these documents. Like, how is this affecting fraud right now?
Look, I think it's a really great question. I think there's no doubt that it's easier, and I think many people are more emboldened to commit fraud when they're not having to do so face to face. The reason why the word con man exists is it comes from the word confident, and con men had to be incredibly confident to swindle somebody face to face. And if you think about that, people can now hide behind their computers and they can do these things all across the country. It makes it, dramatically easier. One of the, many different fraud layers that we have within our system is we look at what we call like repeat offender fraud. And so we see applicants that try to come in to Snappt, and because we have this 1.9 million units across the country, right? We've got a really large footprint. We can start to see these trends of folks that will apply to 200 different properties all in the course of a week.
I couldn't even imagine that. I hate applying to one unit, once
Yeah.
every year or whatever. So that's crazy. But I mean, 1.9 million units that you guys are monitoring. You're starting to see some trends. I want to talk about those trends, but before I get there, I want to ask you because this is something that comes my way pretty frequently. Are there any regional differences in the types or prevalence of fraud?
Look, there are certain cities, states, locales that have just been a lightning rod for fraud for, the 6 years that we've been in business. Places like Atlanta, places like Florida, we're certainly seeing quite a bit of it in the Sun Belt. It's going to be most prevalent in big cities. Basically, it's here to stay. It's here to stay, and I think not only is it in big cities, but it also they really tend to target lease ups. Because if you think about it, right, you've got a vacant entire property, right? You need to lease this sucker up. They're giving all the concessions possible. Speed is at a premium, and fraudsters know this. So, of course, does fraud affect stabilized properties that are in suburbs? Of course. But by and large, it's going to affect predominantly lease ups and predominantly properties in major cities or cities of big transition, right? Like cities that are kind of on the rise, like in Austin, Texas, is a really great example.
I was going to say when you talked about some things like the Sun Belt or whatever, so it sounds like where people are moving, right, wherever they're building new
Correct.
properties, you can anticipate fraud will follow. And I think you bring up a great point about lease ups, right? They're trying their best to get these things leased as quickly as possible, right? They're giving out high fives every day about how quickly you can get these units. You're not really, double checking some of these things. And then again, it's just being exacerbated by like the fact that we don't have people necessarily always on site going through the documents one by one, because that's
Correct.
it's too slow, right?
Yep. Regardless of the scheme, fraudsters will always try to put some sort of time pressure around their fraud scheme. So that's why it fits perfectly with a lease up, right? The incentives are aligned on both ends to get this deal to happen quickly, and they thrive on that need for speed and confusion.
If you already are trying to have like a time crunch yourself because you are trying to commit these frauds, if the person you're trying to fraud is also on a time crunch, like these things just coincide hand in hand. Dan, we're talking a lot about fraud here, and I think we can all agree that fraud is, not good. Obviously, we're trying to stay away from having our properties be full of fraudulent applications and things, but simply just beyond the financial risks, what other consequences can resident fraud have for a property or property management company? I mean, what's going on here?
There's a lot of different ways of looking at it. So obviously you mentioned just like the financial risk. There's also what type of resident are you allowing into the community? The average property that's using us is 260 units. So you can think of that as, potentially 260 families. And so who are you inviting into that community? A lot of times folks will be committing this type of fraud just because there's an apartment that they can't quite afford, but that they want to live in, right? But there are also many examples of you might have someone who can afford the rent, but maybe they make their money illegally. So they don't have a way of legally showing where they make their 10K a month. And are you inviting drug dealers or, folks that work in like criminal enterprises into those communities with those 260 families, right? We've also found situations where, they're literally renting this apartment for things as horrible as like drug dealing and human trafficking. Again, that kind of fits into that bubble of like, who are you allowing into the community? It's also the property damage and just reputational damage of like, is this a community that I want to live in with these types of folks?
I really like the way that you said that, there's 260 families, and
Yeah,
you invite like one person in who's doing like the wrong stuff, and then
that's
all it
right.
takes is one bad interaction, and now it's, something major happens here.
Yeah, they're throwing parties, they're letting dubious people in. You never know.
We have all relied on traditional income verification methods for since the dawn of time, right? What are their limitations in today's world?
First of all, let's talk about the role of a leasing agent. A leasing agent's purpose is obviously to, get heads in beds, right? But of course, what we're seeing right now is that leasing agent turnover is as high as 50%, right? So you've got this role that's incredibly important that has a 50% turnover. And also, these folks are being paid a commission on the amount of applicants that they turn into residents, right? So where you end up is a misaligned incentives of a job that people don't plan on being in for a long time, that are then compensated for how quickly they get people in and whether or not they get people in, not whether or not they stay in. Okay. Now let's also remember that a leasing agent, they are not an underwriter. They do not come from an underwriting background. They do not come from a fraud detection background. These are charismatic, likable people that are there to get residents excited about the community and to move them through the rental application process. So I think just structurally, the way that we have done income verification, in my opinion, is totally counterintuitive to how it should be done. And the way that Snappt is doing it is not only do we verify whether or not that this applicant's identity is authentic, we verify whether or not their financial information is authentic. We then verify whether or not the income that they provided fits with your property's income criteria, and therefore we remove that process of relying on the leasing agent, who, like I said, has that conflict of interest, from getting involved in that process. So that's, I think, just overall, like, let's remove leasing agents from underwriting. Let's remove leasing agents from fraud detection. Let's get them back front and center with applicants and prospective residents, and make them be that that charismatic ambassador for the building. The other issues are, how are we, what types of information are we looking at? How are we calculating gig? How are we looking at folks' ability to have side hustles outside of their day to day? And I think what's really important is to be able to have a process that takes in these alternative types of income that we're seeing more and more often, and doesn't rely on the leasing team to make that distinction.
You're right. There's a division of powers, right? You can't hire someone to be a jack of all trades, and underwriting is certainly not something that you can just pick up on the side. I think it's probably too important. And so having your leasing professionals, again, like you're saying, this misalignment of incentives, be the one to try to figure that out. That's tough because they're obviously trying to close the unit. They want to put someone in that unit, so they're going to try whatever they can to get that. And you're right, they do get paid out on that. So like that's an important part of what they want to do. So
Right.
I'm really glad you brought up gig workers, because this is something that everyone wants to know about, right? The rise of like the side hustle, world that we're living in, the economy. People are just trying to do more to earn that extra income. What specific challenges are y'all facing when it comes to looking at like gig income work, or how does Uber and DoorDash, how are these things affecting you?
That's part of our platform. So essentially, what leasing, what applicants can do is, when they're sent the Snappt income verification, they can choose whether or not they want to upload financial documents, or they can connect with their online payroll. And so the beauty of our online payroll is that it connects with 90% of the U.S. workforce, and that also includes gig. So I think there's like, don't quote me on this, but 30 plus different gig platforms available there. So when an applicant comes in and says like, hey, I work at, ABC Corp, they can literally type ABC Corp. It'll link to their payroll system. They log in, they can then pull that information, which pulls gross income as well as real-time employment status, which I think is incredibly important. Not only knowing that Marcus makes, 10 grand a month, and that he's been working at the Jay Turner podcast for 3 years, but also that he is currently employed today. And then what you could do, Marcus, is you could then go, oh, I also drive for Uber, connect a different account, log in with your Uber, and that goes there. So it's something that's been very, very much top of mind for us, and why it's part of our most recent product release.
One of the next things I was going to ask you is, what are some key factors that property managers should consider when they're evaluating, these different, fraud technologies or whatever? And you don't have to convince me. I'm bought in on Snappt personally. I think I've seen some of the pictures of the dashboard and things like that, and it's fantastic to look at. But what I'm hearing you say is like that you can't take this decision lightly if you're a property manager or a property management company, right? Like if you're going to do this, like it needs to be done very well. And I would argue that your product is something that does this very well. Outside of just financial considerations, I think ease of use is another major concern, right? You want something that is just really easy for everyone to use and look at. What else should property managers be concerned with?
In the early days of running Snappt, there have been many times where we were real close to not existing anymore. I mean, that's obviously very different now. We raised $100 million in March of 2022. But I think when you're evaluating a software provider, something that's really, really important is to ensure that, all right, if we're going to spend all this time and money onboarding this software, like, are they going to be around in 6 or 12 months? It's really tough to raise out there. It's really challenging. The other things to consider is like, what is their security posture? What are they doing with data? Are they SOC 2 Type 2? What is their customer support like? Um, how can I be sure as a customer that this company is making the necessary investments in R&D and engineering, as well as machine learning and generative AI, to talk about the rise of fraud, and to be sure that not only are they that they have created a proactive way of staying ahead of fraudsters, and that's something that has been key to Snappt, and why we're the first company in the world that we know of that's identified inception fraud that I was telling you about before, where they're breaking into legitimate payroll companies, and that's only a function of our size and scale, and the fact that we're able to hire this forward-facing fraud forensics team that's literally scouring the internet looking for the most up-to-date fraudulent tactics, and trying to at least trying to stem them before they affect their customers.
I love hearing that. You're trying to find the problems before they arise. That's fantastic.
And, I'm sure there's some of our customers that are listening, right now that have, received an email from us when we've said like, hey, we've just identified this most recent fraud tactic. And, a few months ago, like these folks got in, and like, we just want to let you know what your risk profile is. And unfortunately, there's no such thing as a perfect system. Never will be. But at least, when you're working with Snappt, that you're, working with the pointiest edge of the spear that's doing absolutely everything they can to stop fraud.
Again,
Thanks.
as someone who works with data security is absolutely paramount to me. These are the things that are important. Also, we work in such a heavily regulated industry that you got to make sure that this data is incredibly protected. You can't just have this out there and available. People's income, all their other defining features, really important stuff. So happy to hear that Snappt is absolutely taking care of that. Let's Dan, let's take a 10,000 foot step back real quick.
Sure.
And let's look towards the future. What future trends in resident fraud detection and prevention are you most interested in or concerned about?
It really has to do with, inception fraud. Let's just say this was a problem that we saw affecting, of our 7,000 communities, I think it affected like 100 in March or April, grew to a couple thousand. It's now affected 4,500 of the 7,000 communities that Snappt is protecting. This is only going to continue to get worse. It's funny, we're actually in conversations with some of these payroll platforms to let them know about what's happening. So we're trying to do everything that we can, but it's not only like inception fraud, but it's it's what's next, right? Because these fraudsters are getting more and more sophisticated, and they are congregating on these online forums and Reddit, and their job is to this is a Unmasking. And so the way that they're leveraging these platforms, the way that they're leveraging AI, it's why we spend $10 million a year on our R&D budget, just so we can do absolutely everything we can to stay ahead of these folks. And in the event that we're not, that we're able to catch these trends as quickly as possible. Typically, it only takes somewhere between 4 to 6, and then we're able to catch that trend.
Yeah, I got to be honest with you. Every time you start talking, my stomach just drops a little further. You hit us with some really big numbers there.
That's tough work on a Monday. My bad, dude.
No, it's just one of these things that, like, you think fraud exists out there in the industry, but it's not something that happens to me, right? Like, that doesn't happen at my community. That doesn't happen at my company. We don't have those problems. But you're saying these big numbers, and I'm like, well, actually, if you do the math, this is definitely happening just about everywhere. And I live in Houston, right? Big city, people trying to move here. So I'm definitely right in the heart of it,
Marcus,
as well.
I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but Houston is one of the worst cities in the country.
You know what?
Sorry. When it comes to fraud rate, it's one.
All right, everyone who's listening, please send Dan a bad email about bad mouthing Houston. No, that makes a lot of sense, right? Like, I'm my eyes are at least open to that fact. I understand that this is probably one of the worst cities in the country when it comes to rental fraud and that kind of stuff.
Don't worry, Dallas isn't far behind.
Love to hear that. I'd rather that be worse, but I'm slightly feeling overwhelmed just talking to you about this information, right? About all this data, everything you're hitting me. I like to think of myself as trying to stay at the forefront of everything, but I'm not the subject matter expert when it comes to this. And so what advice would you give to property managers who are like me, feeling overwhelmed by the need to stay ahead of all these trends and the need to adopt to new technologies to keep up?
Wow. I guess we'd probably be listening to podcasts like you guys have here, right? I mean, because that is the challenge, right? My background is in property management, and we started this company because this is the problem that we were seeing. But I understand that being a property manager, a leasing agent, a regional manager, and on the ownership asset group, you've got way too many priorities than you have time in the day, and to try to stay on top of these trends is nearly impossible, especially when there's, companies popping up here and there that they say they can do the same thing, or they just have different methodology. This is way better. It's way cheaper, and here's why. My suggestion would be to reach out to, other folks within your company, other folks that you may have worked alongside, in the past, and talk with them about what they've seen, what softwares their companies are using, what trends that they're seeing. Because look, take it from me. Obviously, we have a myriad of reasons as to why Snappt is the best in the marketplace. Obviously, we live and breathe everything we do here, but nothing is going to quite be as impactful as speaking to others within the industry, staying on top of podcasts like this, and asking companies for their data, asking for case studies, and trying pilots.
Thank you for the plug to the podcast. I'll do one back to you. Y'all actually put out a nice quarterly, I don't want to call it like a newsletter, but like a recap of like some of the trends and fraud that you're seeing. And it's really incredible because it actually goes even just, further than the multifamily world itself. It starts touching in different fraud areas throughout the entire country. And that's actually, one of the first things I read when I first heard about your company. And I was like, this is incredible. Why is no one else putting something like this out there? This is the first one that I found for that. So I'll plug that. And, if you're a property manager who's feeling overwhelmed, just go to the Snappt website. They got all kinds of great little blog posts and data on all this stuff. And honestly, I think I read through like the last 100 of them. I was just so interested.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you guys for putting out great content. Dan, I got one last question for you.
Yeah, what you got?
It's about your logo. Specifically, what's going on with the squid or the octopus? What is it? We had some internal debates here.
So his name is Sherlock, and Sherlock is a squid. I wish there was like a better story behind it than it's something that our marketing team put forward. They put together a few different logos. Look, maybe it's because, I used to play minor league baseball. And I don't know if you know, like a lot of minor league baseball teams, they have those kind of like weird mascots. Maybe that's what I was so drawn to about it. But my co-founder Noah, he also loved it, and I don't know. We just
Look,
that's.
all
I
on
wish there
board.
was more to it than that. That we just kind of liked him.
Perfect. I love him too. I think he's a fantastic Sherlock. I'm glad he has a name. That makes me feel a lot better. I'll definitely be referencing him as such going forward. If people have any other questions, comments, concerns, or emotional outbursts about you talking bad about Houston,
Specifically the fraud rate, and it's the data.
Yes.
Don't get mad at me.
what's the best way to reach out to Snappt? How do they get more information?
Yeah, just please go to our website, www.snappt.com. That's S as in Sam, N as in Nancy, A as in Apple, P as in Paul, P as in Paul, T as in Tom.com.
Love it. Thank you so much, Dan.
Thanks, bud.
A huge thank you to Dan Berlind for that eye-opening conversation. I don't know about y'all, but I'm definitely seeing resident fraud in a whole new light. From fake pay stubs to sophisticated AI-powered schemes, it's clear that fraudsters are constantly evolving, and we in the multifamily industry need to be ready. Be sure to check out Snappt's website, that is snappt.com, for more resources, blog posts, and information on how to stay ahead of these ever-changing trends. It's an invaluable tool for anyone in the industry. Hey, Houston, I hear you. Dan might have called us out on our fraud rate, but we're taking notes and stepping up our game. This has been the Multifamily Review, your go-to podcast for all things multifamily. We'll be back next time with another insightful episode. Until then, stay vigilant, stay informed, and keep those applications honest.